Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day you happen to be listening. Welcome back to the Laugh and Learn podcast with America's funniest handyman and friends. With me, as always, is my friend Andon Heinberger, fellow handyman and carpenter. I'm really happy that Andon is such a good carpenter because today's episode, we're going to be talking about trim, cutting trim, installing trim, the many uses of trim, the many different kinds of trim. There's a lot to talk about. In fact, there's so much to talk about. Andon and I have already figured out that there's no way we're going to cover everything about trim in one episode.
There's no way.
It's just going to be like 5 or 6 episodes at least to cover all the little subtle nuances of all the different types and uses of trim and all of the different ways that you can cut it and install
Probably
it.
one of the most important parts of finished carpentry is knowing about what trim to use.
I would say it's the most
The most
important aspect of finished carpentry. And when we say finished carpentry, we're not talking about people from Finland cutting different boards.
I'm not from Finland.
You're not from Finland.
No,
I am
I'm
not
not
from Finland. I can sound like I am from Finland if I want to. But finished carpentry means it's what you do to end a project.
Yep.
It comes at the end of a project, whether it's an addition or a kitchen or even just a small built-in. The trim is the last thing that gets done.
You want it's the closer. Think baseball. You don't want a closer that sucks.
Right.
Because they lose the game.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if for all you Glenn Ross fans out there, coffee is for the closers.
Put that coffee down. Coffee's for closers only. You think I'm fucking with you? I am not fucking with you.
Coffee is for the finish carpenters because we're the ones that come in and we make everything look nice, whether the framer knew what he was doing or whether the framer was a hack.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
And we often have to help fix things after plumbers and electricians have come through and done their thing too.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're chaos eaters.
Yep. So let's see. So yeah, trim makes everything look nice. And there are several reasons that people have trim. One reason that we discussed, which is probably one of the oldest reasons, is to make your house look really nice and pretty.
Yeah, correct. It's like putting on a tie or putting on a suit coat, or it is the finishing touch to the aesthetic. That's a fancy word. It just means how things look.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, to hit them with some of that history you was telling me about.
Yeah, trim carpentry comes from back in like Greek and Roman. If you didn't know, the reason it's called the Oval Office is that's Greek. The Greeks' favorite shape was an ellipse. Roman is the sphere or the circle. But all this is ancient architecture, the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, what in the hell is that? Those are the different types of columns in classical architecture. And they all have a base column, then they have the flutes, and then you go up to the top where you have the crown, and then the last thing is a big ornamental. It would be Corinthian with all those special leaves that you've seen.
Mm-hmm. And I would say back up until sometime in the 20th century, trim was, and probably still is in some respects, a little bit a way to show off how much money you have.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, you drive a BMW,
mm-hmm.
but when you come over to my house and you see, oh my, like, look at that stair railing.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the size of that crown. That's like 2 feet.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just one little piece.
It's
7 pieces.
A basic stairwell as opposed to some wainscoting, which could be different types. There's wainscoting that is literally just some basic trim applied to the wall.
Yeah.
And then there's crazy
Yeah.
wainscoting
Victorian,
that's super
you think
intricate.
Victorian, you think like someone just needs to chill out.
Yeah.
Because it's
Like,
just,
whoa.
just like, whoa, we finished 3 weeks ago and we're still putting trim up. Like more on top of more on top of more. The Victorian era was all about like how over the top.
Yeah.
So now we're here now. Everybody has their house, and everybody, when they get something done or they're trying to do a facelift, it could be just to make things look better. Is the easiest way to do that is to put new base casing around the house in the correct places, and it makes everything like come together. Like a drywall finish where just drywall comes together looks great if it's a good 90. But if you case that out with a little jam and some casing, it looks 300 times better.
Well, that brings us to one of the utilitarian uses of trim, which isn't just about making everything pretty and showing everything off or making your house look opulent, but trim has a utilitarian.
What's its function?
Yes, it's very functional in that it covers unseemly joints, like
Gaps,
where a door is put in with a frame, the wall meets the door jamb, and there's a gap there.
Yeah, there's this big line.
And whether it's a tight gap or a small gap, it just looks looks like kind of but you put a piece of casing, trim casing, over that gap, and now, oh my goodness, it looks so fancy, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's true.
And same thing at the base of a wall where the wall meets the floor. It's really hard to make it look nice without any type of trim. So baseboard is probably the most common use of utilitarian trim, because if you don't put baseboard down, it's going to look like shit.
You put a floor down and it comes over to the wall. There's a gap between where the floor meets the wall that you got to cover it up, or it looks like a floor is meeting the wall. It's just unfinished. Yeah,
and a lot of times in a lot of construction, you don't want your sheetrock to come all the way to the floor anyway,
right?
Because if there's moisture, especially if you're on the ground floor, and moisture gets into the house, then the sheetrock acts like a sponge, and it just wicks up the water. So the baseboard is kept off of the floor,
right?
Maybe 3/8 of an inch or more, knowing that we're going to put a piece of baseboard up against it. It's going to look nice, right? Okay, so that covers our function for trim.
Yep.
Right?
So
looks nice, covers gaps,
looks nice. It can be used for multiple different purposes, but it's a finish carpentry technique. You got to
where cabinets are installed in different situations, especially kitchens. A piece of trim is a very simple and not very costly way to figure out, okay, how are we going to make the cabinets look nice once they're installed?
Right.
Okay.
So like boxes on the wall. Yeah.
Now let's get into the different types of trim. So go ahead, name some.
So let's start at the bottom. You got baseboard.
The bottom.
The bottom. You got baseboard. Okay. With baseboard, you're going to hear a lot of people. The first thing you hear is baseboard. The second thing you hear is shoe molding. Everybody, what is the shoe? The shoe is the piece of
generic term.
Very tiny piece of trim. It's about 3/4 high that goes at the bottom. So if you have pre-existing baseboard and the floor goes up to pre-existing baseboard, well, they're not going to cut all those perfectly. And then at the end, when the floor is down, they put in a shoe molding to cover up the gap of the flooring.
Yep.
Or it's all done brand new and the flooring goes under the base is on top. You don't need a shoe because this line with the flooring is perfect.
But not always perfect. The only reason that this line, if you bring new baseboard down to a floor, the odds of that floor not having any imperfections are slim. That floor is going to have uneven things that go along with it. So unless the carpenter is patient and does a nice job of scribing,
that's a fancy word.
Oh, Jesus,
Fancy.
there's a word that we got to define.
That's called vernacular.
The vernacular. So if you don't scribe the baseboard in, a lot of times they don't scribe the baseboard in. You just slap that down and there's some uneven gaps. Shoe molding will cover those gaps. And shoe molding isn't really...
Good finished carpenters don't like at the end of a job when a customer says, is that gap going to stay there like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You want to be, everything needs to be tight.
So then we have door casings. Yep. Door casing is what goes around the door.
Yeah. Covers up the jamb.
Uh-huh.
Covers up the drywall meeting the jamb.
Mm-hmm. Look at that.
That looks nice.
Mm-hmm.
And there's,
so that's door casing. That goes around doors, windows.
And these can all come, just so everybody knows, in different widths. You can get little tiny 2-inch. It could be 3 1/4.
Yeah.
It could be 5 1/4. It could,
It just depends on how fancy you want your house to be and how much money you want to spend.
Yeah.
I mean, there's casings where you're using 2 or 3 different pieces of wood built up over each other to achieve a larger, more opulent look. And that's just a matter of, okay, I have the money and I want it to look really nice.
Your doors and windows,
not
especially
required.
Windows, cased windows with an apron.
Mm-hmm.
An apron is
and a windowsill.
A full cased window has the casing around the outside with the miter. Mm-hmm. It has a window sill, which is the board that comes flat from the window straight out, and then has the apron, which is at the bottom, and it has a little return on it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we cut some returns to show people, didn't we? We'll just show them right now. Okay,
so an apron. Yep.
Apron.
I mean, this is a perfect example.
Now, a return can be used in a lot of different situations, but right now we're going to show you how a return works on an apron. So in this case, we're talking about a window casing, a window sill. So the window casing would die down into the windowsill, and you would use the same material. So this would be the window casing coming around, and then underneath you make an apron that goes underneath the windowsill. But to terminate that end profile, we cut what is called a
return.
And that return means that I simply just make a 45 cut on the end of the board, and then I cut a small piece of pie, another little piece of 45.
That looks tricky, I reckon.
It is a little bit tricky, but once you learn how to do it, it's not that difficult. And then that looks very finished.
Now it finishes against the flat surface.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This goes up against.
That looks way better. I'll just say it right now. And I see it all the time. The back bevel 45 finish is like, oh man, you got all the way there and then you did that.
And then you did that, Yeah. And this just, once you nail this up, you can just put a little bit of glue or a little bit of caulk on both sides of that and just tucks it right in.
Yeah.
And it looks
one shot with a pin nail or a little piece of blue tape just to hold it together overnight.
Mm-hmm. So that brings us to, let's see if we covered types of, we talked about wainscoting. Wainscoting can be a bunch of different types of trim.
So we started at the base, then we went to casing, doors, and windows.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're at the wall. Wainscoting.
And wainscoting is a whole episode.
Yeah, we won't get into
this
that.
podcast. And there's many different types. But as far as trim is concerned, wainscoting will either finish a very intricate type of wainscoting, or there is a lot of less expensive, cheaper wainscoting that you see, which is basically just moldings applied to the wall.
Yep.
And
like
it's
picture
just
frames.
Just like picture frames. And that can look really nice and dress up a living room or a stairwell or something like that. And then there's crown molding.
Yep. Now we're all the way at the top. And crown can get, a lot of people think, oh, I know exactly what crown is, the most ornamental one of the most difficult if you don't know what you're doing.
Or you're short,
Or
like us.
Yeah.
I had did you work for me when we had that? You didn't work for me when we had that guy who was 6'7".
No.
He was 6'7".
6'7". That's like two of me.
He was such a nice guy. This guy was awesome, and
Which means he could reach to like 8 foot.
He could hold up a piece of crown molding for me. I'm not kidding you. I was on a job where I had a lot of crown molding, and he was
what?
He worked for me. He only worked for me for 2 weeks, and I can't remember his first name.
Man,
but he was such a sweet guy, and he always wore like a collared shirt. He dressed really nice.
Yeah,
and he could, and I would call him, and I'd be like, hey, and if I had like a long 16-foot piece of crown that needed to go up, he would come in and he would hold up the other end for me while I nailed in the other end and worked my way down. And there was all this cool stuff that he did not need a ladder for. But at the end of like 2 weeks, I had to fix almost every single miter joint that he put together. And because all we were doing during those days was finished carpentry, he had to find another job, and it broke my heart to let him go because he was such a sweet guy. But he just couldn't get the angles down. It was one of the few people I've ever worked with that couldn't figure it out.
Speaking of angles, what with finished carpentry? So
we were talking about crown, right?
Yeah, we're crown, but this kind of ties in because there's outside corners and inside corners.
Right.
What is that? When someone says, "Oh, it's an outside corner," what is that?
You're asking me?
I'm asking you.
Oh, okay.
What is, or what is an inside?
Well,
Obviously,
let's do the outside corner first because I happen to have some pieces prepared for this. It's funny that you should ask that question. It's like I knew you were going to ask that question. So let me move some of this stuff out of the way.
This is all just impromptu. We just happen to have these boards right
This
here.
is an example. This is baseboard.
Okay.
And this is an example of an outside corner.
Okay.
That's an outside 90, which means that I cut a 45-degree angle on this one and a 45-degree angle on this one. And I make sure. Oops. Hold on.
I love it. The ravings of a.
I can't tell you who that was.
Okay. Probably me.
No, you know who it was. I just can't say it out loud.
Say it in your heart.
Okay. So
back to where
45-degree cut, 45-degree cut equals a 90-degree angle.
Okay.
And this happens occasionally in houses where there's a fancy wall or something like that, which is you have an outside corner that is more obtuse and it's a 45 degrees this way. So it's a 22.5 cut and a 22.5 cut. And that's an outside miter.
And I'll throw this out there for all you experienced carpenters. That happens a lot when you're trimming out a bull nose.
Mm-hmm.
What's
a bull nose?
That's when the drywall is a radius. It's round and not a 45 or 90.
And you got to do a little tiny.
Yeah. And then it's a 22 and off you go.
But that's an example right there of an outside miter.
Okay.
That's an outside miter.
What's did we do inside? We didn't do it.
We did not make an inside miter.
It's the opposite.
But before we get to that, we will talk about, let's talk about it.
Okay.
So
anything
bigger than a shoe molding, typically, people that have been doing this a while or people that have learned how to do this already pretty much don't go back to inside miters.
Right.
Because
so before you get there, don't
go ahead.
I don't.
Don't tell them yet.
So the
it's
word
a secret.
Vernacular. We said miter a bunch. Right. What does miter mean? What does that mean? Just let's say someone's listening and they hear the word miter.
Miter means you cut a nice straight angle on one board and another corresponding straight angle on the other board that's the exact same degree, and they meet up and they look real pretty.
Yeah.
So that
And
when they
should,
come
they
together,
should meet. The goal is to meet perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So every time you and me cut a miter, we are shooting for perfect. And there's like,
yes, we want, there's an example
yeah,
of a miter cut that comes together really nice. And it's very easy to make the miter cut look perfect right now while I'm holding it up.
yeah, right.
But if I'm putting this casing up on a door and the door jamb itself is not a perfect 90, and that miter cut, this is nice and flush and this is nice and flush, or even, I should say even, and they don't come together, there's a slight gap at the bottom or the top, then what are you going to have to do with the board in order to make that miter cut work? Are you just going to slather it with caulk and call it good? Or,
well, if you're not patient, you might. You might just say something stupid like, well, you can't see it from my house.
But if you are patient, what would you do?
Then you take it and you go recut it at the saw, and you determine if you're going to cut it a little longer or shorter. You have to. It's the heel is the short part of the point, 45,
the short point,
and then the long point, short point, long point. Some carpenters and
short point, long point.
Yeah, when you were teaching me trim carpentry, you made me, and you probably don't remember this. You made me measure out a whole room, and I had to transcribe every angle all the way around the room and then go cut it. And I had to write from B to B, butt to butt, or butt to short. And I had to write what it was. So when I was at the saw, I wasn't just looking at numbers. So when you're cutting, there's to short point. When you're measuring, where are you measuring to?
The short point or the long point? The
short point and long. Some carpenters, and look, what's the 12 carpenter rule? Everybody,
10 carpenter
10
rule.
Carpenter.
10 carpenter rule is if I give the same project to 10 different carpenters, all 10 carpenters are going to approach that project differently and give you a slightly different result, but it'll all probably look pretty much the same.
Yeah, exactly. So some carpenters, and I've seen it, I don't do this. Here's a question. Do you measure to the short point or the long point?
It depends on what you're cutting.
There you go. So
if I'm cutting door casing, I have to measure to the short point.
Right.
I can't measure to the long point because it's not going to work out.
Right.
This is where the door jamb meets.
Comes, where it's covering. Okay. The first point that it covers is that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I'm doing the inside corners going up to some baseboard, then I'm measuring to the long point. So every single piece of trim that you are measuring and cutting for
has a different
thing. So you need to notate that while you're writing it down. Otherwise, you have to cut each piece one at a time, which means you're going to make 100 trips back and forth to the saw versus 5 or 10 trips back and forth.
So what if I wrote from long to cope point?
Oh, now you want to get into coping.
So what would that mean?
So
right, because we're doing some inside corners, and it looks like I'm doing YMCA. I promise you.
Well, we could do a whole episode.
Maybe we should.
We will end up doing a whole episode on. This would basically be.
That's cute.
This would basically be like an inside miter, like this board coming up to this one coming up to this one coming. So that's an inside miter. I would measure long to long. If I'm coping, I'm still going to measure long to long.
Yeah.
But what
just
I'm going to do,
coping is a carpentry technique.
We're
not making this up.
We're showing it to you right now.
It's a true deal. It's something once you learn it, you literally you
won't go back.
You won't ever go back. You won't.
No.
I mean, you might, but
for anything larger than a shoe molding, a good finish carpenter will cope cut.
Yep.
All of
and I
his or hers inside miters.
I've cope crown before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I cope crown all the time.
It just looks so good.
Yeah, I don't inside miter anything anymore. So what coping is instead of having a 45-degree miter meet a 45-degree miter, what you do is you cut a 45-degree miter on one of the boards
that are meeting. Yep.
The other board just gets installed flush, and then you hone out with a jigsaw that little bit of exposed miter.
Yeah.
And it just
comes together.
Can they see that, Jim? Yes. Okay, so then instead of a miter meeting a miter, you have a flush piece of wood, and then the cope cut comes up to it. And as you can see, it just
perfect.
It just comes together perfect. And how much time did I spend on that?
30 seconds.
Yeah. And look at that. That's just gorgeous. And then what that does is instead of having two boards that can walk away from each other through the expansion of seasons and stuff, now you have one board that's stationary, is not going to move. And now you've eliminated the possibility of expansion by 50% because only one board can come away from the other one. So instead of having a joint that can open up like this, now you have a joint that's a lot tighter and can only open up a little bit.
No matter what, it just always looks better. It's tighter, it's cleaner. And once you learn how to do it, it is so simple.
And we should really do a whole episode. We will sometime this year. We will do an episode on miters versus cope,
and maybe we'll do some we'll
have some examples
with the camera so people can see.
Yeah, we definitely
right now we're doing a lot of this.
Everything's at the table, everything's pre-planned, but we are going to start having some demo stuff while we're doing an episode. Andon and I are going to actually show you guys how to do some stuff.
Yeah. I like that.
Okay, cool.
Okay, next.
All right. So
we've cased our house now. We got base. We got our windows.
We did talk. One of the things that I want to talk about, and we'll talk more about it in a second, is one of the things that is heavily required when you're cutting and installing trim is patience. You need a lot of patience. And today's episode is brought to you by Johnson's Big Boy Patience in a Can. What do you reach for when the job gets tough? When things just aren't coming together? Have you ever kicked a toolbox or punched an apprentice in the face? Of course you have. But these types of reactions are juvenile and can lead to injuries and lawsuits, don't you know? It's time to put away those childish behaviors and reach for the product that's totally revolutionizing the entire construction industry. That's right, Johnson's Big Boy Patience in a Can. Dr. Safety here, and I didn't get to be the #1 name in job site safety for nothing. And I'm here to tell you that a lack of patience on the job site can be dangerous, leading to poor productivity, damaged building materials, and worst of all, hurt feelings. So the next time you feel your blood boiling and you can feel the pressure building inside your cranium and you know that you're just about to blow, stop, put down your tools, walk over to the job box and get yourself a big old helping of Johnson's Big Boy Patience in a Can. Johnson's Big Boy Patience gives you just what you need to finish that installation calmly, efficiently, and without all the drama. Big Boy Patience is made from old world peace and new age technology. Johnson's Big Boy Patience allows you to grow up, evolve, and stop acting like a total asshole. So the next time the job is on the line and you want to be the better man, reach for Johnson's Big Boy Patience in a Can. Johnson's Big Boy is a registered trademark of America's Funniest Handyman. America's Funniest Handyman. Come for the knowledge, stay for the laughs. Okay, we're back. Wasn't that wonderful? Johnson's Big Boy Patience in a Can. Get you some today because the thing that requires patience with regard to trim cutting. And this is where most newbies and people without patience go wrong, is they don't want to go back to the saw.
Yeah.
They want to cut the trim once, and then if it doesn't come together, they're either going to force it or they're going to get pissed off that they have to go back to the saw and cut it again.
Yeah.
And you and I both know that even just doing one door casing, first of all, I'm gonna cut one or both of these pieces hair long,
right,
first, because I want to make sure that if that's not a perfect 90-degree angle right there, which way is it off? And I might have to take a hair off of it. But I also know ahead of time there's such a great possibility of me having to cut the same board 2, 3, sometimes 4 times before it's right. And that's why I have the patience to go back and forth to the saw, because I know I'm going to be doing it.
And we could talk about all the different techniques. Just to case a door, it would take up 2 or 3 podcasts, but
yeah, just having 2 boards, meat
there's
versus
shims in the
biscuiting.
toolbox when we're putting them together. There's glue, there's sandpaper, there's all these different things.
Biscuits.
There's biscuit.
Why is that so funny? Just because I said biscuits?
Yeah. There's all these different tools.
And I'm not talking about the biscuits you get at the Cracker Barrel, which are tasty.
And you get it to where you want it, then you make it even better with, I glue all my miters.
Mm-hmm.
Every single one. I don't care whose house or where I'm at. I glue them. And I've met carpenters who are like, oh my gosh, like, you don't need to glue that. Yes, you do. I strongly believe that, because it keeps them together.
Mm-hmm.
Turns it 2 pieces of wood into 1 piece of wood. And when you're ready for it to be 1 piece of wood, you don't want the call where someone says, can you, like, everything's separated.
Mm-hmm.
So the
caulk, also
caulking, filling your holes with, I don't know, everybody has their different technique. I use lightweight spackle on my holes, a little proud, and I come back half an hour later and I brush them down with a sponge, and it's like they never even existed.
Now, let's say you're doing a room full of trim.
Yeah.
Do you caulk that trim, or do you let the painter do it?
I'll caulk it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When I leave, I don't want them to be like, because there's this very gray area where clients think that I'm a painter.
I have a gray area right here.
No, and the painter thinks the carpenter's a painter, and the carpenter thinks the painter's a painter, because everybody's going to argue about who's going to fill the holes and do the caulking. Well, the carpenter's supposed to do that. Well, in my head, I think the painter's supposed to do it. So I just cut all that out, and I fill my holes and I caulk. I don't go overboard, but when I leave, I think, let's say the guy that comes in after me just wants to get to work. I want him to be able to just start painting.
Yeah.
So I'll fill up my holes. Now, if it's like a whole house, 20 doors, windows, this, that, and the other, and I'm like working on production, I'm going to let the painter do the filling. Like,
I'll tell you, I caulk most of the trim that I do. And like you said, in cases where I'm doing hundreds and hundreds of feet of trim, I'm not going to caulk everything. If I know a painter's coming in behind me, I'll talk to the homeowner about it.
Right.
But I would say 9 times out of 10, I caulk all of my trim the same day that I install it. And I'll tell you why. Do you want to know why?
Why, Tommy?
Just say what you got to say.
I'm a big believer in not leaving
true believer.
I'm a big, giant, true believer in not leaving any weird looking stuff behind me. And that is because I charge a lot of money for what I do. And so when my homeowner comes back into the room at the end of the day, if they're not home, whether they're home or not, when they come in and see the work that I've done, I want them to go, I don't want their eye to be drawn to anything
that looks unfinished.
So if I do a whole bathroom full of trim and it's going to take me a half an hour to caulk it, I will caulk it, because when the homeowner comes in, they go, wow, it just looks ready. It looks perfect. It looks done. If I don't caulk it, their eye might be drawn to a couple of places where it's probably a good joint. It's probably a good looking minor joint, but because there's some imperfections in the wood or whatever, they're like, huh, what's that? I don't want them to do that. I want them to walk in and go, wow, this looks good. Fantastic.
Right.
That's it. So I'm just in that habit.
I think there's a level of standard. And so we always want to shoot for a very high standard.
You and I do.
At least we do.
Yeah.
And that's true. Like, and I can get a little like, my personality, I can comb over something. If you've ever done some drywall patches, and
did you say comb over?
Comb over. Like, you should be done. Don't touch it. It's fine. And I've touched it and I've been stuck trying to make it perfect, and it's drying and I'm still touching it. And you cut kind of like a feedback loop trying to make things too perfect. So you got to know there's a line between
when's enough
perfection and insanity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And here's a good example that I use quite often. And that is, okay, let's say I coped two pieces of trim together. And,
Here, let me hold this one and you hold that one.
Well, let's just say that, hold on. No, you got to hold it at an angle where I can put it together. So it's got to be at a 90. So let's say I'm doing a whole house full of different joints, and I've got one
that's
cope that's just it's not perfect.
Yeah.
Right? But at the same time, like, I'm not caulking this job. Painters are coming in behind me and they're going to caulk, right?
Right.
Like, I'm not going to spend my customers' money making a joint absolutely 100% what they say, tits,
cherry,
or perfect, or cherry, when some guy's going to come behind me and slather it with caulk anyway.
Yeah. And hopefully he does a good with his caulk guns. Some people turn really good carpentry into really terrible carpentry.
Yeah, you can make,
and it's nothing that you did or I did, but it looks terrible.
Yeah, you can make some really nice carpentry look good or look terrible with a bad caulk job.
Yeah.
And vice versa. You can make some really hacky carpentry look decent with some caulk.
That's the way it goes. But as with trim carpentry, like, and we want it to look real good. So when we're done, it's like, well, we don't know what level of painter we're going to get, so we want it to look good enough to where they're not like, oh, we're going to fix this.
Yeah, and that's a lot of times why I caulk my own stuff, because I'm like, if I do it, I know it's going to be done right. It doesn't look like I'm trying to hide anything. It just looks good. It looks like it's supposed to look.
Yeah, and don't ever caulk a half an inch gap.
Yeah, take it back to the saw and recut it.
Please.
You know, that brings up a funny story. When I was starting out as a carpenter, I worked for a house flipping company in Washington, D.C.
Oh, this ought to be fun.
And this was when I was brand new, right? And I had never done carpentry before. I was a pool guy before this. So I knew how to, I was a painter and a pool guy before this. So I'd been in the trades, but I hadn't done carpentry before. And the guys it was me and these two guys from Costa Rica, Herbert and Ricardo, right? Okay. And Herbert and Ricardo didn't want to do any carpentry at all.
Oh.
All they wanted to do was paint and drywall. That's all they wanted to do, which was great. That was spooky. So I don't know if they could hear that on the thing, but so Herbert and Ricardo didn't want to do any carpentry, which was awesome for me because that's all I wanted to do. And this was a house flipping company, and all they wanted us to do was slap it together.
Yep.
And I got to learn how to be, this is where I cut my teeth originally as a carpenter, was for I think 2.5, 3 years, all I did was work on these house flippings.
Okay.
Right.
So you're ripping that stuff out and throwing it back in.
Lots of door casings, lots of new doors. And because there wasn't a high standard, I was able to just learn on my own for a couple of years. I just taught myself how to do everything. But the point of the story was when I was first starting out and cutting trim, I would cut a piece and we only had so much trim. And I'd be like, there'd be a gap there where the miter came together.
Yeah.
And this happened several times a week. I would go get Ricardo, who was the boss. I'd be like, hey, Ricardo, can you come in here and look at this? And I would point to my bad miter joint. And Ricardo would always say the same thing, to the point where I stopped asking him after a while. But I loved hearing him say it. I would go, Ricardo, do you want me to recut that and install it? No, Tommy, it's okay. I put a mucho cooking. I put a mucho cooking there. Nobody see nothing. Mucho cooking fix everything, Tommy. Mucho cooking. There are houses in DC that are literally held together with mucho cooking.
Yes.
Tommy, I put mucho cooking here, fix everything. No worries, okay? You finish over here. Yeah. Don't worry about that. Who cares? You know? Mucho cooking.
There's like...
you use mucho cooking?
No.
No
mucho.
No. We're good carpenters now. No bueno. Mucho cooking.
No bueno. I always want to be the best of the best of the best. I want to get better and better. I want someone to call me one day and pay me to make one cut on Brazilian hardwood in the center of their restaurant.
I have had this experience on a couple of jobs where
I want one phone call. I want to tell them it costs you lots of money. And I walk in with a gigantic saw and a sharpest blade you've ever seen. And I make one cut on the most expensive wood. You can write me a book about where it came from and how it was cut down.
I had this experience on a job in downtown Philly, working for the home was owned by a high-end interior designer.
Okay.
And she was spending large amounts of money on stuff. Like we're talking about giant pieces of crown molding, huge pieces of, I mean, it was just gorgeous. And I was subcontracting. I was like an independent subcontractor, just working by myself. This is a few years ago when I started this business. And she took a liking to me.
Yeah.
And the company kept having to call me and bring me in to do stuff that was like, okay, Tommy,
don't mess this up.
Yeah. This piece, these two pieces cost $6,000.
Yeah.
We want you to come in and
this is
put
like
it together. And it was cool. It was
carpentry
awesome.
There
really
is
cool.
a lot of fear and trembling.
Yeah.
Good. It's high pressure.
Rightly so.
No one's watching you, but everybody's going to be watching you because when you leave, everybody looks at it all the time.
Yep.
And there's a lot of pressure. And I just had this weekend. I put in a $10,000 glass slider.
Mm-hmm. With no directions.
More on that later.
Yep.
No directions. So there was a lot of pondering and pacing and thinking as I double checked, triple checked, quadruple checked what I was going to do, because I knew that that's a very expensive.
We talked about this in the last episode, and it's more appropriate for trim than it is for framing. And that is measure twice, cut once. But if the thing that you're cutting costs several $1,000s and there's only one of them, measure 20 times.
Yeah.
And just confirm that everything's going to come together nice before you slice into it.
Like this is no joke. I have.
Good, because I'm not laughing. It's not the least bit funny.
This is serious. Okay. I have set a whole cut thing up with all the measurements, gone back and redone the whole process several times. and then sat down and thought to myself, have you made any mistakes? And thought about what I'm thinking about. Okay. It sounds absolutely bizarre, and there have been times I have caught myself in going over my process where I'm like, oh, wow. Oh, like I was moving so fast that I didn't do this I made a mistake, but because I went back and I checked a couple times and I really questioned myself, I didn't when it was time to do it and cut it, put it in, there was no mistake.
Yeah.
And I think a good carpenter.
The older I get, the more experienced I am, and the more expensive that I get, the more I am not an intense, teeth grinding hurry to get it done, because I know that ends up being more expensive than being calm,
right, and
taking my time,
patience,
and being methodical, and doing it once.
There's an old song. I don't know where that came from.
Yeah. But I mean, I get hired a lot. I mean,
that's the goal.
I'm not sure if this happens to you yet, but I get hired by contractors to do the work on their house.
Yeah.
Contractors who will not hire their own carpenters to work. They're like, nope, you know what, Tom? There's only one guy I want working on my house, and that's you. And I'm like, but don't you have a whole crew? And they're like, yep, that's right. But they hire me to do the tricky stuff.
Yeah.
Which is great.
It's like I have
such a cool
feeling. That level with some of my plumbing skills.
Yes.
I've been called to do some things where I literally had to drop a torch down a hole and then you set up some mirrors and solder stuff down inside of a hole 2 feet away. Like thinking to myself, I mean, this is witchcraft.
And this is cool because you guys need to know that even though we're probably spending a lot of episodes talking about carpentry, we are going to spend some time in the future talking about
handyman stuff. Yeah.
Some other stuff. Like Andon is a journeyman, I would say master plumber. And I'm a pretty good electrician, but we're going to have some, right now it's just Andon and I, but down the road, as we go on, we're going to be getting more in depth. We're not just going to be talking about carpentry. We're going to be talking about electrical, HVAC, wallpaper, and we're going to have guests in that are experts in these areas.
Drywall.
And we're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. But I think that pretty much kind of covers everything for trim today. Was there anything we're missing?
We covered it. We got some of the history. Where does it come from? Why it's used?
Yep.
The different types of trim.
I think it's time. It's that time. I have to.
I don't know how many bosses on job sites don't roll with nothing well. Like,
oh yeah,
why are you so mad all the time?
Oh, dude, I worked for a guy. I worked for a guy years ago, and I subcontracted for this guy, and he was a builder.
Yeah,
I won't say his name.
Don't say.
But we did a job. He hired me and Brad. To come in and do a coffered ceiling.
Okay.
And Brad and I did this coffered ceiling, and he participated and helped us out with it, but it was for a gay couple.
Okay.
And this guy that hired us was ultra fundamentalist Christian conservative, like gay is against the law, that type of thing. Then? But he kept saying the whole time we were there for an entire week, and these guys had stuff and pictures laying around the apartment, right?
Yeah, at their house.
Yeah. And this was in their bedroom. He had
a problem with it, though.
Oh, he had a big problem with it. He must have apologized to Brad and I every day, 3 or 4 times, going, if I didn't know these guys were a couple, and he would, I'm not going to use the profanity that he used. If I didn't known that they were a couple of, I wouldn't have taken this goddamn job. I wouldn't have taken this goddamn job if I didn't known these guys were a couple of, and the whole time, Brad and I are like, why do you care? Why do you care?
It's carpentry.
This is their bedroom. This is what they do. Like,
wow,
who cares?
Well, there's all sorts of interesting people out there that are very upset with themselves.
Well, I think
listen, jobs, carpenters, bosses, but it just feels like the bosses a lot of times. You weren't like that, but I'm just saying I've had
Yeah, we both have worked for those
multiple
guys.
experiences where the boss is just not a happy person.
Yep. We both worked for a lot of those dudes. That's why we're self-employed now.
I'm telling you, that would be a good show, a TV show with all the archetypes of different carpenters and bosses in one show.
Yeah.
As one crew.
Mm-hmm.
Where, that's another talk.
Yeah.
But
I think that pretty much wraps it up. Well, I think that covers us for today.
All right.
I don't know if you practiced at all on how to end the episode, so I may end up saying it by myself. But as always, thanks for letting us bring a whole lot of experience
I don't know if
and a little bit of humor onto your job site. See you next time.
Bye now.